Rich man shaves 4-year-old girl's head, but this horse saw everything and does something. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The sun was lazily rising over the cornfields of Harmony Creek when Lily woke up that Tuesday morning. Her blonde hair spread across the pillow like melted butterscotch. The 4-year-old rubbed her still sleepy little eyes and called for Grandma Betty, but only silence answered in the small wooden house she shared with the woman who had raised her since she was a baby. Betty had left before dawn for the neighboring town, where she had a doctor's appointment scheduled 2 months ago. The 63-year-old woman had been experiencing chest pains that left her breathless, especially during the cold winter nights that were approaching. She had left Lily with clear instructions: not to open the door for anyone, eat the oatmeal that was in the pot, and only play in the backyard, away from the road. The property where they lived was on the edge of Walter Sterling's farm, a 52-year-old man known in the region for his wealth and explosive temper. The owner of several lands and businesses in town, Walter treated employees like disposable objects and maintained a reputation for being unkind that made people lower their eyes when he passed through the dirt streets of downtown. Lily was playing alone in the backyard when she noticed a shadow moving near the fence that separated her house from the neighboring property. It was Thunder, Walter's white horse, a majestic 8-year-old animal that always sparked her curiosity. The horse had dark, expressive eyes that seemed to understand the feelings of the people around him, and had developed the habit of approaching the fence whenever he saw the girl playing. That morning, Thunder seemed restless, moving his head from side to side and stomping his hooves on the ground forcefully. Lily approached the wooden fence and reached out her small hand to touch the animal's muzzle, who greeted her with a low, soft whinny. It was as if the two shared a secret language made of looks and silent gestures. The sound of heavy footsteps on the front porch made Lily move away from the fence quickly. She immediately recognized the imposing silhouette of Walter Sterling, who was walking towards the main door with a somber expression on his face marked by the sun and bitterness. The man was wearing his usual clothes: leather pants, white cotton shirt, and boots that left deep marks on the damp earth. Walter had been watching the house all morning, waiting for the right moment to act. He knew that Betty had traveled to the doctor's appointment, and that the girl was completely alone. For months, he had developed a strange obsession with Lily's blonde hair, believing that possessing something so pure and beautiful from an innocent child could change his luck in the businesses that had been facing difficulties. The front door was unlocked. Betty would never imagine that someone would be able to break into her house in broad daylight, especially to harm a defenseless child. Walter pushed the door slowly, making the old hinges creak, and entered the small and simple living room, decorated only with basic furniture and yellowed family photos. Lily was hiding behind the sofa when she heard the heavy footsteps approaching. Her little heart was beating so hard that she almost thought it would jump out of her chest. She knew Walter by sight. She knew that he was the rich man in the region, but she had never spoken to him. The man's imposing presence and cold look left her paralyzed with fear. Walter found her curled up behind the furniture, shaking like a leaf in the wind. He bent down and pulled her by the arm forcefully, dragging her to the kitchen, where there was a wooden chair near the window. From his shirt pocket, he took out an old straight razor that had belonged to his father, an instrument he had kept for years, waiting for the right moment to use it. The girl tried to cry out, but the sound came out as a low and frightened whimper. Walter forced her to sit in the chair, holding her small arms with one hand, while with the other he wielded the straight razor. Lily's blonde hair shone under the light that came in through the window, and for a moment Walter hesitated, hypnotized by the beauty of those silky strands. Outside, Thunder witnessed everything through the kitchen window. The horse began to whinny desperately, stomping his hooves on the ground and moving his head aggressively, as if he could feel the girl's terror. His dark eyes were wide open, and he struggled against the fence, trying to find a way to get to her. Walter held a lock of the blonde hair and began to cut with abrupt and violent movements. Lily cried silently, tears running down her red face as she saw her hair falling on the cold kitchen floor like dead petals. The straight razor was old and dull, tearing more than cutting, causing pain to the child's sensitive scalp. With each strand that fell, Walter felt a strange satisfaction, as if he were stealing something precious that no one else could have. He continued cutting until only uneven tufts remained stuck to Lily's head, who now looked like a broken doll with glazed eyes from crying so much. When he finished, Walter put the straight razor in his pocket and left the house as if nothing had happened, leaving Lily sitting in the chair, motionless and in shock. The girl remained there for hours, looking at the hair scattered on the floor, unable to process what had happened. Betty arrived in the late afternoon, tired from the trip and worried about the test results. She found her granddaughter hidden under the bed in the bedroom, speechless with terror, with her hair cut brutally and irregularly. The woman was desperate, hugging Lily and trying to make her talk, but the girl only trembled and pointed towards the window where Thunder remained restless, as if trying to tell what he had witnessed. Betty held Lily in her arms all night, feeling her granddaughter's small body tremble without stopping. The girl had not spoken a single word since she had found her hidden under the bed, only pointed to the window with her little eyes red from crying so much. The blonde hair that was once the family's pride now lay cut irregularly, leaving the child's scalp with sores and irritations. The next morning, Betty made a decision that she knew was dangerous. She knew Walter Sterling's reputation in the region well. She knew that he was a powerful and feared man, but she could not let what had happened to her granddaughter pass. She put on her best dress, the same one she wore on Sundays in church, and walked determinedly to the big house on the neighboring farm. Walter's property contrasted drastically with the simple little house where Betty lived with Lily. It was an imposing two-story building, with a large porch and well-kept gardens that demonstrated the owner's wealth. Several employees worked in the surroundings, taking care of the cattle and crops, but everyone lowered their heads when Betty passed by, as if they knew that something terrible was about to happen. Walter received her on the porch, sitting in a dark wooden rocking chair, smoking a cigarette with an air of superiority. He was wearing clean and well-ironed clothes, contrasting with Betty's simple appearance, who had hands hardened by work and a face marked by years of struggle. The man did not even get up when she approached, only looked at her in a despicable way. Betty took a deep breath and gathered all the courage she had in her chest. She accused Walter directly, telling in detail what she had found when she arrived home. Lily traumatized, her hair cut brutally, the child in a state of shock. Her voice trembled with anger and despair as she demanded explanations and asked for justice for what had been done to her innocent granddaughter. Walter listened to everything with an impassive expression, blowing cigarette smoke towards the woman's face. When she finished speaking, he stood up slowly and laughed in a cruel and mocking way. He denied any involvement in the event, claiming that he had spent the entire day taking care of business in town, and that several people could confirm his alibi. Walter's response was even more frightening than Betty expected. He approached her, letting his shadow cover the small and fragile woman, and spoke in a low and threatening tone. He said that she and her granddaughter lived there because of his generosity, that the land where the little house was built belonged to him, and that they could be evicted at any moment if they continued spreading lies about him. Betty tried to argue, talk about the evidence of what had happened, but Walter interrupted her with an abrupt gesture of his hand. He made it clear that no one in town would believe the word of a poor woman against that of a respected businessman, and that if she insisted on making accusations, he would make sure that both were expelled not only from his property, but from the entire region. The threat had the desired effect. Betty knew well the power that Walter wielded over Harmony Creek. She knew that he had influence over local authorities and that he could easily fulfill his promises of revenge. She returned home defeated and frightened, carrying on her shoulders not only the pain for what had happened to Lily, but also the fear of what might come next. In the days that followed, the situation became even more difficult. Betty developed a persistent cough that left her breathless during the nights, especially when she tried to sleep. The chest pains that had taken her to the doctor intensified, and she began to have difficulty performing the household chores that she had always done with ease. Lily remained silent, refusing to play or even leave the room. She spent her days sitting near the window, watching Thunder, who remained agitated on the other side of the fence. The horse seemed to understand the girl's suffering, approaching whenever he saw her and emitting low and soft whinnies as if trying to console her with his presence. Betty's health deteriorated rapidly. The stress of the confrontation with Walter, combined with the constant concern for her granddaughter's well-being, deeply affected her already weakened body due to age and years of hard work. She began to have episodes of shortness of breath that left her pale and trembling, forcing her to lean on the furniture to avoid falling. One morning, Betty woke up with such intense chest pains that she could not get out of bed. She called for Lily, but her voice came out weak and hoarse. The girl found her grandmother lying down with a grey face and laboured breathing, clearly needing urgent medical help. It was the first time since the attack that Lily had shown any reaction, running to the nearest neighbour to ask for help. Mrs. Francis, a middle-aged woman who lived a few houses away, came immediately to the call. She found Betty in serious condition and quickly organized transportation to the hospital in the neighboring town. She promised to take care of Lily while her grandmother was hospitalized, but it was obvious that she saw the situation as an unwanted burden. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed what Betty already suspected. Her heart was failing, the result of years of hard work and the recent stress that had completely overloaded her body. She would need to be hospitalized indefinitely, with no prediction of when she could return home or if that would be possible. Meanwhile, Lily was in the care of Frances, a neglectful woman who saw the child only as another mouth to feed. Frances's house was messy and dirty, with several teenage children who completely ignored the presence of the traumatized girl. Lily slept on an old mattress on the floor of the living room, without a proper blanket for the cold nights that were approaching. Thunder seemed to sense the change in the situation. The horse began to appear near Frances's house, grazing on the vacant lot next door and watching the window of the room where Lily slept attentively. During the early hours of the morning, he came even closer, as if standing silent guard to protect the girl from any danger that might arise. The presence of the horse did not go unnoticed by Walter, who began to circulate the area more frequently, always watching the house where Lily was staying. The man knew that Betty was hospitalized and that the girl was vulnerable, only under the careless care of an overwhelmed neighbor. It was the perfect opportunity to complete what he had started without the risk of interference from the protective grandmother. A week had passed since Betty had been hospitalized, and Lily remained silent, lost in her world of silent terror. Frances barely paid attention to the girl, too busy with her own children and with the gossip circulating around the neighborhood. The house, always full of noise and confusion, contrasted with the haunted silence that Lily carried with her. During the afternoons, when Frances dozed off in the kitchen chair after lunch, Lily often hid behind the living room window curtain, watching Thunder, who remained nearby like a silent guardian. The horse seemed to understand her suffering in a way that no human being could, his dark eyes conveying a compassion that warmed the girl's wounded heart. Walter had spent several days studying the routine of Frances's house, observing from afar the times when the woman went shopping, when the teenage children were at school, and especially when Lily was alone. His obsession with the girl had intensified since the first attack, and the few strands of hair that had grown on the child's head bothered him deeply. On Thursday afternoon, while Frances had gone to the market and the children were in school classes, Walter decided to act again. He approached the house silently, checking that there was no one in the vicinity. Lily was alone in the living room, sitting on the floor, playing distractedly with some old buttons she had found in a drawer. The sound of the door opening made Lily raise her head quickly. When she saw Walter entering the house, her small body began to tremble violently. The memories of the first attack came back like an avalanche, and she tried to run, but her legs were shaking so much that she could not move properly. Walter easily reached her, grabbing her thin arm hard enough to leave marks. This time, he had brought a different straight razor, sharper than the previous one, which gleamed under the dim light coming through the dirty windows of the house. His eyes had an even darker expression than the first time, as if the satisfaction of the previous attack had fueled an insatiable hunger. He dragged Lily to the kitchen, where he repeated the grim ritual, forcing her to sit in an old and broken chair. The girl tried to resist this time, shaking her head from side to side, but Walter held her face with one hand, while with the other he wielded the straight razor. The few strands of hair that had grown were cut again, but this time with even more aggressive movements. The new straight razor was sharper, but Walter used it with such force that he ended up scratching Lily's scalp in several places. Small drops of blood began to run down the girl's forehead, mixing with the tears that ran uncontrollably down her pale face. The physical pain added to the psychological terror, creating an even more intense traumatic experience than the first. Thunder, who was grazing near the house, immediately realized that something was wrong. The horse began to stir violently, whinnying loudly and stomping his hooves on the ground forcefully. His agitation grew with each second, as if he could feel Lily's pain and despair through the walls of the house. When Walter finished cutting the hair, he held Lily's face with both hands and looked directly into her frightened eyes. In a low and threatening voice, he said that if she told anyone about their encounters, much worse things would happen. He threatened to hurt not only her, but also her grandmother in the hospital, making it clear that his power extended anywhere. The terror in the girl's eyes seemed to satisfy Walter in an unsettling way. He put the straight razor in his pocket and headed for the door, feeling that he had completely consolidated his control over the situation. However, upon leaving the house, he found Thunder standing right in front of the entrance, blocking his path. The horse was visibly agitated, with dilated nostrils and eyes wide with rage. When he saw Walter, Thunder reared up on his hind legs, whinnying menacingly and showing his teeth. It was the first time the animal had shown aggression, and his physical imposingness suddenly became intimidating. Walter tried to get around the horse, but Thunder moved to block his path again. The animal seemed to understand perfectly who was responsible for Lily's suffering, and his posture made it clear that he would not allow the man to go unpunished. The confrontation lasted several tense minutes, with Walter trying to find an opening and the horse preventing any movement. Finally, Thunder charged against Walter, using all the weight of his body to push the man. Walter lost his balance and fell to the dirt ground, dirtying his expensive clothes and scratching his hands as he tried to protect himself from the fall. The horse remained over him for a few seconds, making it clear that he could cause much greater damage if he wanted to. Scared and humiliated, Walter managed to get up and ran away from the house, looking back several times, fearing being chased by the animal. He had never been confronted in this way, especially by a horse that was supposed to be gentle and obedient. The experience left him disturbed, but also intensified his desire for revenge against everyone involved. Thunder entered the house through the door that had been left open, finding Lily still sitting in the kitchen chair, paralyzed with fear and with blood running from the wounds on her head. The horse approached her slowly, lowering his large head until it was at the height of the girl's face. With surprising gentleness, Thunder touched Lily's face with his muzzle, gently wiping away the tears that continued to flow. The girl, still in shock, reached out her small hand and touched the animal's neck, feeling for the first time since the first attack that she was not completely alone in the world. From that moment on, Thunder assumed the role of Lily's official protector. The horse positioned himself in the backyard of Francis's house, near the windows, maintaining constant watch. During the nights, he slept leaning against the wall where the girl's room was, and during the days, he followed all her movements with vigilant attention. When Frances returned from shopping and found Lily with new wounds on her head, she was irritated to have to deal with more problems. She cleaned the injuries superficially and asked what had happened, but Lily remained silent, only pointing to the window where Thunder stood guard. The neglectful neighbor did not make a connection between the injuries and the presence of the horse, assuming that the girl had hurt herself playing alone. She was too busy with her own problems to investigate the situation properly, leaving Lily even more vulnerable to future attacks. The hospital in the neighboring town was plunged into the silence of the early morning when Betty closed her eyes for the last time. Her heart, already weakened by years of hard work and the stress of recent events, finally gave out during the third week of hospitalization. The woman, who had dedicated her whole life to taking care of Lily, passed away without being able to protect her granddaughter from the horrors that were still to come. The news reached Frances through a phone call the next morning. The neighbor received the information with more irritation than sadness, worried mainly about the fact that she would now be responsible for Lily indefinitely. There were no other known relatives, no contingency plan, just a traumatized 4-year-old girl who had become a permanent problem in her already complicated life. Lily was sitting in the backyard when Frances approached to give her the news. The woman, unskilled at dealing with delicate situations, simply said that her grandmother would not be coming back anymore, that she had gone to heaven during the night. The girl showed no immediate reaction, continued looking at Thunder, who grazed near the fence, but something inside her broke definitively at that moment. During the days that followed, Lily became even more withdrawn. She completely stopped eating on her own, needing to be forced to swallow small pieces of bread or sips of milk. Her small body began to wither visibly, the bones becoming more prominent under the pale skin, the eyes becoming deep and without shine. Thunder seemed to feel the girl's deep pain. The horse approached her even more frequently, lying on the ground to be at the height of her eyes, emitting low and comforting sounds that were the only thing capable of eliciting any reaction from Lily. She began to sleep, leaning against the wall that faced the backyard, near the place where the animal used to rest during the nights. Frances was reaching the limit of her patience. Her own children demanded constant attention. The house bills were piling up, and now she had to deal with a child who refused to eat and did not speak a single word. The situation became more unsustainable each day, especially when she noticed the curious and judgmental looks of the neighbors. In the 4th week after Betty's passing, Frances made a decision that would completely change Lily's destiny. She waited until an especially cold winter night, when the temperature had dropped drastically and a fine drizzle was beginning to turn into heavier rain. She woke Lily silently, dressed her in an old and torn coat, and took her out of the house. They walked through the deserted streets of Harmony Creek until they reached near the creek that crossed the town. It was an isolated place, surrounded by trees and bushes, where few people usually passed, especially during the early hours of the morning. Frances looked around to make sure she was alone, then crouched down in front of Lily. In a falsely sweet voice, Frances told the girl that she needed to wait there, that someone would come to pick her up soon. She promised that it would be a kind person who would take care of her better than she herself could do. Lily looked at the woman with her big and scared eyes, not fully understanding what was happening, but instinctively feeling that something terrible was about to occur. Frances walked away quickly, without looking back, leaving Lily alone near the creek. The girl stood in the same place for several minutes, waiting for the woman to return, believing that someone would really come to pick her up. But as the hours passed and the cold became more intense, she began to understand that she had been abandoned definitively. The rain intensified, completely soaking Lily's thin clothes. She sought shelter under a large tree, but the protection was minimal against the icy wind that blew through the branches. Her small body began to tremble violently, her lips turned purple, and she curled up in a fetal position, trying to conserve the little heat that remained. It was in this moment of total despair that Thunder found her. The horse had noticed Lily's absence from Francis's house and set out in search of her, instinctively following the path she had taken during the early hours of the morning. When he saw her curled up under the tree, soaked and trembling, the animal approached immediately. Thunder lay down next to Lily, pressing his large and warm body against the girl's to warm her up. The heat that emanated from the animal was like a miracle for the child who was on the verge of hypothermia. She snuggled against the horse's chest, feeling for the first time in weeks a little safety and comfort. Throughout that terrible night, Thunder remained motionless next to Lily, protecting her from the rain with his own body and keeping her warm. The animal did not sleep even for a moment, staying alert to any sign of danger that could threaten the defenseless girl under his protection. When the sun rose, Lily was feverish and delirious. The exposure to cold and humidity, combined with her state of malnutrition, had completely overwhelmed her fragile body. She called for Grandma Betty between incomprehensible murmurs, her tiny body burning with fever, while Thunder remained by her side, whinnying low as if trying to console her. The horse understood instinctively that he needed to find food and water for Lily. He got up carefully so as not to disturb her and explored the surroundings, finding some wild berries that had fallen from nearby trees and a small spring of clean water. He returned to the girl and, with surprising gentleness, managed to get her to drink a few sips of water and eat small pieces of fruit. During the following days, a strange routine of survival was established. Thunder took care of Lily as if she were his own foal, looking for food, water, and shelter. The girl, in her feverish and delirious state, clung to the horse as if he were her only anchor in reality, murmuring disconnected words and crying softly during the fever crises. Walter, who had noticed Lily's disappearance from Francis's house, began to look for her in the region. His obsession had intensified after the confrontation with Thunder, and he was determined to find the girl to definitively complete what he had started. The idea that she might be wandering alone and vulnerable excited him in an unsettling way. He searched various places where a lost child could hide, checked abandoned houses, empty barns, and finally began to explore the areas near the creek. Walter knew that if he found Lily in a state of extreme frailty, it would be much easier to control her and execute his macabre plans without resistance. On the afternoon of the 5th day after the abandonment, while Lily was delirious with fever in Thunder's arms, she began to murmur Walter's name between her delusions, reliving in nightmares the traumatic moments of the previous attacks. The horse noticed the girl's agitation and became more vigilant, feeling that danger was approaching again. The 6th day after the abandonment dawned with a biting cold that made Lily's breath come out in small clouds of vapor. The girl was increasingly weak, her small body fighting against the high fever that had been consuming her since the terrible night in the rain. Thunder remained constantly by her side, warming her with his body and gently licking her face to try to lower her temperature. It was during the afternoon of that day that Walter finally found the hiding place near the creek. He had followed almost imperceptible tracks, small footprints in the mud that led him to the area where Lily and Thunder were sheltering. When he saw the scene before him, a cruel smile formed on his lips. The girl was defenseless, feverish, and practically unconscious in the arms of the horse. Walter approached silently, observing the situation with unsettling satisfaction. Lily was even more vulnerable than he had imagined. Her precarious state of health made her incapable of any resistance. It was the perfect opportunity to carry out what he considered to be the final act of his obsession, without witnesses and without the possibility of interruption. Thunder sensed the threatening presence even before seeing Walter. The horse raised his head abruptly, his nostrils dilating as he caught the scent of the man who had caused so much suffering to Lily. His muscles tensed immediately, and he positioned himself protectively over the delirious girl, emitting a low and menacing whinny. Walter laughed at the animal's defensive posture, thinking that he could easily get around the protection of a horse, no matter how imposing it was. He had brought not only his usual straight razor, but also a piece of rope and some treats that he imagined he could use to distract Thunder while he approached Lily. Walter's approach awakened Lily from her feverish delirium. Even in her weakened state, she immediately recognized the silhouette of the man who had tormented her so many times. Her small body began to tremble, not only from fever, but from pure terror, and she tried to hide even closer to Thunder's protective body. Walter threw the treats towards the horse, hoping that the animal would move away to investigate the food. But Thunder didn't move an inch, maintaining his protective position and watching every movement of the man with alert and hostile eyes. The horse had learned to recognize Walter as a deadly threat to Lily and would not be fooled by simple tricks. Realizing that the distraction strategy would not work, Walter decided to act more directly. He approached quickly, trying to grab Lily by the arm while the horse was momentarily distracted. But Thunder was faster, turning and blocking access to the girl with his large and muscular body. The confrontation that followed was much more intense than the previous ones. Walter, driven by a rage that grew with each second of resistance, desperately tried to reach Lily, while Thunder moved with surprising agility to block all his movements. The horse used his weight and strength to push the man away, but Walter persisted in his attempts. During the fight, Walter managed to get around Thunder for a few seconds and grabbed Lily by the arm, pulling her violently. The girl screamed in pain and terror, a sharp sound that echoed through the deserted creek area. It was the first sound she had emitted since the abandonment, a desperate cry that pierced Thunder's heart and activated all his protective instincts. The horse turned with a fury that Walter had never witnessed in any animal. Thunder reared up on his hind legs and charged against the man with all his might, hitting him in the chest with his front hooves. The impact was devastating, breaking several of Walter's ribs and throwing him violently onto the rocky ground near the creek. Walter tried to get up, but the pain in his chest was unbearable. He had completely underestimated the horse's determination and strength when it came to protecting Lily. Blood trickled from his mouth, and he realized that he was seriously injured. Still, his unsettling obsession made him try once more to reach the girl. Thunder did not allow any second attempt. The horse attacked again, this time stomping on Walter and pushing him towards the creek. The man rolled down the steep bank and fell into the cold and flowing water, hitting his head on a large rock that was in the stream bed. The impact was so strong that he lost consciousness immediately. The current carried Walter's unconscious body downstream, but Thunder did not bother to check his condition. The horse returned immediately to Lily, who was in an even greater state of shock after witnessing the violence of the confrontation. The girl clung to the animal's neck, trembling violently and murmuring incomprehensible words. The effort of the confrontation had completely exhausted Lily's energy reserves. Her fever rose even higher, and she began to have mild seizures that left Thunder desperate. The horse understood instinctively that the girl needed urgent medical help, something that he could not provide alone in the midst of nature. It was at this critical moment that the Miller family appeared on the horizon. June and Bob were returning from checking on their corn crops when they spotted the strange scene, a white horse protecting a small child near the creek. Initially, they hesitated to approach, but when they realized that it was a girl in critical condition, they ran to help. June, a 52-year-old woman with a motherly heart, immediately recognized the signs of severe malnutrition and high fever in Lily. She and her husband Bob, a 55-year-old man known in the region for his kindness, did not hesitate to take the child in. They had tried to have children throughout their adult lives, but had never succeeded, making the encounter with Lily something they interpreted as a gift from fate. Thunder initially resisted when the strangers approached Lily, but something in the couple's gentle posture and careful movements reassured him. The horse allowed June to pick up the girl in her arms, but remained close, watching every movement with vigilant attention. Bob improvised a stretcher with branches and his shirt to transport Lily more carefully. Throughout the journey to the miller's house, Thunder followed them step by step, refusing to move away from the girl even for a moment. It was clear that the animal had become completely dedicated to Lily's protection and would not allow anything bad to happen to her again. The miller's house was simple but welcoming, built with wood and brick, surrounded by a small garden where June grew medicinal herbs and some vegetables. The couple had lived there throughout their adult lives, building a modest but happy existence based on working the land and helping each other among neighbors. June immediately prepared a warm bath to lower Lily's fever and carefully cleaned the old wounds on her head, which had become infected during the days of exposure. Bob quickly built an improvised shelter in the backyard for Thunder, understanding that the horse would not accept staying away from the girl. During the first weeks at the miller's house, Lily remained in a semi-conscious state, alternating between moments of high fever and periods of deep and exhausting sleep. June cared for her as if she were her own daughter, patiently feeding her nutritious broths and homemade medicines made with herbs from the garden. 3 months had passed since the Miller family took in Lily, and the girl was slowly regaining her physical strength under June's loving care. Her small body had gained healthy weight, the wounds on her head had healed completely, and small blonde strands began to sprout again on her head. However, she remained silent, communicating only through gestures and always staying close to Thunder, who had officially become part of the family. During this period of recovery, strange news arrived from time to time through the neighbors who visited the miller's property. Walter had been found days after the confrontation, floating unconscious in the creek miles away, rescued by fishermen who took him to the hospital in the neighboring town. The man had survived, but the consequences of the accident were devastating for his life of power and control. The impact of the rock had caused permanent neurological damage that severely affected his motor coordination. Walter developed constant tremors in his hands that prevented him from performing simple tasks, such as writing, eating, or dressing properly. His speech became slurred and confused, and he often lost his balance, needing a cane to walk short distances. Even more humiliating for a man accustomed to exercising power through intimidation, Walter had completely lost his ability to inspire fear in others. His employees, who previously trembled in his presence, now saw him as a pathetic and frail figure. Many abandoned their jobs, and his businesses began to crumble rapidly without his authoritarian leadership. It was during one of these visits from neighbors that Bob learned that the town sheriff was discreetly investigating some anonymous complaints against Walter. Stories of mistreatment of employees, threats to poor families in the region, and suspicious behavior involving children had reached the ears of the authorities through people who finally felt courageous enough to speak. Bob, a man of solid principles who had always believed in the importance of justice, made a courageous decision. He sought out the sheriff and reported everything he had witnessed on the day he found Lily, the child in a state of extreme terror, the old wounds on her head that clearly were not accidental, and especially the abnormal protective behavior of Thunder, which suggested that the horse had witnessed violence against the girl. The sheriff, an experienced man named Robert Smith, was deeply disturbed by Bob's account. He had received other vague complaints about Walter's strange behavior towards children, but never had concrete evidence to act. The condition in which Lily was found, combined with the history of complaints, provided sufficient basis for a formal investigation. The investigation revealed a series of disturbing behaviors on Walter's part over the years. Employees who had worked on his property reported strange episodes involving children in the region, situations where he demonstrated excessive and inappropriate interest in young girls. The obsession with Lily's hair had not been an isolated case, but part of a sickening pattern that had been developing for years. When the authorities finally confronted Walter, he was in a regrettable state. The neurological sequelae had worsened, and he lived isolated in his big house, cared for only by an elderly maid who felt sorry for his condition. When questioned about Lily, he initially tried to deny any involvement, But his confused speech and his constant tremors made his lies unconvincing. The decisive moment of the investigation came when June suggested a different approach to help Lily express what she had experienced. The woman had noticed that the girl liked to draw with charcoal on pieces of smooth wood, creating simple but expressive images. With infinite patience, June encouraged Lily to draw her memories, offering paper and colored pencils. The drawings that Lily produced were devastating in their simplicity and clarity. She drew a large and threatening man holding something shiny next to a small girl sitting in a chair. She drew blonde hair scattered on the floor. She drew tears running down a child's face, and mainly she drew a white horse always present, protecting and consoling the girl in moments of terror. These drawings were presented as evidence during the trial that followed. The court was deeply moved by the visual representation of the suffering of an innocent child, especially when June explained how each drawing had been made spontaneously by Lily, without any suggestion or external influence. Walter was found guilty of multiple charges of mistreatment and assault against a minor. His deteriorated neurological condition was considered by the judges not as mitigating, but as a natural consequence of his own cruel actions. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, a sentence that everyone knew would be effectively perpetual, considering his state of health. Walter's final fate was even more ironic than his conviction. During transport to the state penitentiary, the vehicle carrying him suffered a serious accident on a rural road. Walter, already weakened by his neurological sequelae, suffered additional injuries that left him completely paralyzed from the arms down. The hands that had caused so much suffering to Lily would never be able to hurt anyone again. Meanwhile, at the miller's house, a miraculous transformation was happening. 6 months after her arrival, Lily finally spoke her first word since the trauma: thunder. The word came out as a whisper as she brushed the horse's mane during her morning routine, but it was heard clearly by June, who cried with emotion. From that moment on, Lily's recovery accelerated dramatically. She began to speak in short sentences, always directed first to thunder, then gradually including June and Bob in her conversations. Her hair grew stronger and shinier than before, cascading down her shoulders in golden waves that reflected the sunlight like silk threads. The legal adoption process was finalized in a simple but emotional ceremony at the town hall. Lily, now 5 years old, signed her name with trembling letters on the document that officially made her the daughter of June and Bob Miller. Thunder had become legally the property of the family as well, with a special stable built near the main house. A year after her adoption, during the traditional summer festival in Harmony Creek, the moment that completely symbolized Lily's recovery happened. The girl, now 6 years old and with long and shiny hair, danced the square dance for the first time since her trauma. Her movements were graceful and joyful, her smile lit up the community hall, and her hair swayed to the rhythm of the music like golden waves. Thunder watched the presentation from outside the hall through an open window, his dark eyes shining with pride as he watched the girl he had protected with his own life dance happily again. The horse had aged during the traumatic events, now 10 years old, but his dedication to Lily remained unwavering. The community of Harmony Creek celebrated not only the traditional festival that night, but mainly the overcoming of a courageous girl who found in the friendship with an animal the strength necessary to rebuild her life. The story of Lily and Thunder became a legend in the region, a testimony to the power of unconditional love and selfless protection. Today, Lily lives happily with the adoptive parents who love her as a biological daughter, attends the town school where she is known for her special kindness with animals, and maintains an unbreakable bond with Thunder, who continues to be her best friend and protector. Every morning, she brushes the horse's mane while telling him about her dreams and plans for the future, and every night she sleeps peacefully, knowing that her faithful friend is nearby, ensuring that no nightmare from the past can ever reach her again. Justice was done. Love triumphed, and a girl who had lost everything found a family that values her exactly as she is, strong, courageous, and able to love deeply, even after having known the purest cruelty in the world.